Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck tech idea. Today I'm talking about Henzie Toolbox Torre. He's a 3 mana 3/3 and says each creature spell you cast with mana value 4 or greater has Blitz. The Blitz cost is equal to its mana cost. This means that the creature gains haste until end of turn, but at the beginning of our end step we have to sacrifice it. But it also gains that we draw a card when this creature dies. Furthermore, he says, Blitz costs you pay cost 1 less for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. This deck is filled to the top with powerful creatures which either have powerful ETBs, attack or death triggers. Cards that will win us the game are, for example, Vault-Bound Tyrant, a 7 mana 6/6 with trample, and when it or another creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under our control, we gain 3 life and redraw a card. When Vault-Bound Tyrant dies, if it's not a token, create a token that's a copy of it, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. Henzie often has the problem that he blitzes in a creature, which will be sacrificed at the beginning of our end step, and then we are shields down until our next turn. With Vault-Bound Tyrant we will get another copy of Vault-Bound Tyrant, which also has a great triggered ability to draw us cards and gain us life. Ancient Brass Dragon, a 7 mana 7/6 with flying, and when it deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. When you do, put any number of target creature cards with total mana value X or less from graveyards onto the battlefield under your control, where X is the result. Not only will we sacrifice a lot of creatures to our Blitz trigger, but the great thing about Ancient Brass Dragon is that he cares about all graveyards, so even if we roll a low result, we can still bring back creatures from our opponent's graveyards. Giant Ediphage, a 7 mana 7/7 with trample, and when it deals combat damage to a player, create a token that's a copy of Giant Ediphage. If this creature stays on the battlefield for a few turns, it can get out of hand really quickly, and if it connects it will leave you with a token copy of itself. Galter, Stampede Tyrant, an 8 mana 12/12 with trample, and when it enters the battlefield, put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Due to us putting our remaining powerful creature cards in hand onto the battlefield due to this trigger, we will still be left with an army of powerful creatures when we have to sacrifice Galter in our instep. Junji, Midnight Sky, a 5 mana 5/5 with flying and menace, and when it dies, choose 1. Each opponent discards 2 cards and loses 2 life, or put target non-dragon creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control and you lose 2 life. Graveyard recursion is a powerful thing in this deck, as we have to sacrifice our creatures in our instep when we cast them for their blitz costs, and it is always great to bring a creature card back with Junji's death trigger. Ojer Kaslem, Deepest Grove, a 5 mana 6/5 with trample, and when it deals combat damage to a player, reveal that many cards from the top of your library. You may put a creature card and or a land card from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order, and when it dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed under its owner's control, and its backside is a land card. If you can connect with Ojer Kaslem, you will at least ramp yourself and maybe also put a very powerful creature card onto the battlefield, which will also be a powerful threat. After our combat phase we will still have another main phase left, so if we have mana left we can still use our creatures for more advantage before we have to sacrifice them. For example with cards like Diabolic Intent, a 2 mana sorcery, and as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature. Search a library for a card, put that card into your hand and then shuffle. Eldritch Evolution, a 3 mana sorcery, and as an additional cost to cast it, sacrifice a creature. Search a library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, where X is 2 plus the sacrifice creature's converted mana cost. Put that card onto the battlefield and then shuffle your library and exile Eldritch Evolution. You might also find yourself in a spot where your opponents want to try to interact with your blitz creatures, so Nasty End is a powerful interaction. A 2 mana instant, and as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature. Draw 2 cards. If the sacrificed creature was legendary, draw 3 cards instead. Just as Deadly Dispute, a 2 mana instant, and as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature. Draw 2 cards and create a treasure token. Rushed Rebirth is one of my favorites in this deck, a 2 mana instant and choose target creature. When that creature dies this turn, search a library for a creature card with lesser mana value, put it onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffle your library. There are many effects like the following one. Not Dead After All, a 1 mana instant, until end of turn, target creature you control gains. When this creature dies, return to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control, then create a Wicked Roll token attached to it. There are a bunch of powerful creatures that can be featured in Henzie Toolbox Torre, but I'd like to give out a few more honorable mentions. For example, Chaos Defiler, a 5 mana 5/4 with trample, and when it enters the battlefield or dies, for each opponent choose a non-land permanent that player controls. Destroy one of them chosen at random. What I like about these cards is that they have enter the battlefield effects and also death trigger, which will lead to you drawing a lot of value from these creature cards by casting them for their blitz costs. Vindictive Lich, one of my personal favorites in this deck, a 4 mana 4/1, and when it dies, choose one or more. Each mode must target a different player. Target opponent sacrifices a creature, target opponent discards 2 cards, and target opponent loses 5 life. What I think is very important when it comes to Henzie Toolbox Torre is that every trigger that you get from your creatures tries to affect all of your opponents, so Vindictive Lich is a great creature card in this deck. Primeval Herald, a 4 mana 3/1 with trample, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may search a library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Grave Titan, a 6 mana 6/6 with Death Touch, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, create 2 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Blitz this creature card, make a total of 4 zombie tokens, sacrifice it in your end step and still draw a card from it. This is a lot of value. Balor, a 5 mana 5/5 with flying, and when it attacks or dies, choose one or more. Each mode must target a different player. Target opponent draws 3 cards, then discards 3 cards at random. Target opponent sacrifices a non-token artifact, and Balor deals damage to target opponent equal to the number of cards in their hand. And last but not least, Archon of Cruelty, an 8 mana 6/6 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, discards a card and loses 3 life. You draw a card and you gain 3 life. There are a lot of powerful enchantments that can be played in this deck, so let's talk about some of them. Shadow in the Warp, a 3 mana enchantment, and the first creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 less to cast. Whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, Shadow in the Warp deals 2 damage to that player. Greater Good, a 4 mana enchantment, and sacrifice a creature at instant speed to draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power and then discard 3 cards. Flame Shadow Conjuring, a 4 mana enchantment, and whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 1 red. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature. That token gains haste and exile it at the beginning of the next end step. Industrial Advancement, a 4 mana enchantment, and at the beginning of your end step you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is that creature's mana value. You may put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Evolutionary Leap, a 2 mana enchantment. For 1 green mana and sacrificing a creature, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Up the Beanstalk is an absolute powerhouse in this deck. A 2 mana enchantment, and when it enters the battlefield and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, draw a card. You want to win more? You get it. Heartless Summoning, a 2 mana enchantment, and creature spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. The only downside about it is that creatures you control get -1/-1, but you barely care about that because all of your bombs are strong enough. Cauldron of Souls, a 5 mana artifact, and you can tap it and choose any number of target creatures. Each of those creatures gain persist until end of turn. So when they die, and if they had no -1/-1 counter on them, return them to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter. Grave Pact, a 4 mana enchantment, and whenever a creature you control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. The Skullspore Nexus, an 8 mana legendary artifact, and this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Whenever 1 or more non-token creatures you control die, create a green fungus dinosaur creature token with base power and toughness each equal to the total power of those creatures. You can also pay 2 mana and tap it to double target creature's power until end of turn. Saw in Half, a 3 mana instant, and you can destroy target creature. If that creature dies this way, its controller creates 2 tokens that are copies of that creature, except their base power is half that creature's power and their base toughness is half that creature's toughness, round up each time. And last but not least, Riveteer's Ascendancy, a 3 mana enchantment, and whenever you sacrifice a creature, you may return target creature card with lesser mana value from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Do this only once each turn. Alright guys, these were a few cards that I would feature in Henzie Toolbox Torre. Let me know down in the comments below which cards you would add to the deck, which legendary creature I shall feature next, and then I will say, see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.